An all too common pitfall I think a lot of us experience in the work life and in business is tying up too much of our identity in what we do for a living, but even more than that, in where we work and allowing that company culture or maybe even something that someone we looked up to at that company tells us is true about us, allowing that to define our sense of who we are. I want to share a personal story of mine that really impacted over the last decade who I would become professionally with you guys because I think it's probably pretty relatable, even if your professional, trajectory has been a little different than mine, and hope that it's helpful, especially if you're a young person in your career. So back in 2013, I was coming off of a freelance kind of entrepreneurial gig. I did well at the work, but there was a lot to learn, and I wasn't a very good businessman at that point. And so, quite frankly, I was kind of desperate financially. And in retrospect, that when I interviewed at this job that I'm going to be talking about, that robbed me of the ability to really negotiate from a place of strength because I was desperate. But I tried to have a positive attitude about that. Starting the role at that company, thought I'm going to be a company man and really throw myself hard into this role and prove that I'm worth more than this and that I can climb the ladder. And in a lot of ways, in the first year that I worked there, that seemed like it was the case. I got a raise 3 times. I got promoted twice, the third time to a directorial level title where I was overseeing 2 other departments and several people, but was also directly handling SEO accounts and social media accounts and all kinds of things. There were points, though, shortly after that promotion where a lot of what was great about that job quickly deteriorated. From a pure math standpoint, I looked at it like it takes X number of hours to properly manage this account, and we have Y accounts. That's like 4 times beyond what even is possible in a month's work. Tried to pitch that to the boss. He kind of accepted it, but didn't care and just basically said, keep going. By the time I was managing people, it was a pretty exciting but scary prospect because I had no management experience at that point and sort of assumed that this manager, this owner of the company who talked a big one about this big manufacturing background that he had, I thought he was going to act as a mentor and train me on that. And his idea of training people on management is just throwing employees under them and say, manage. And when it was time to fire people, he just came to me one day, I still remember it, and said, fire this intern. And gave me and bear in mind that it's going to be like this, or you might want to take this approach or bring up these things. And if they say this, this, and this, here are good ways to handle that. Nothing. And I suppose in his mind, it was like, I'm going to throw you in the deep end and see how you do. But that's a pretty terrible way to manage people and a pretty terrible way to judge if they're going to be effective in the role because you essentially haven't trained them at all. And then you get mad at them if they don't instantly do a good job. And things were tough. And in the last 6 months I was at that company, it went the route that a lot of marketing agencies go, where if you try too hard to be the Walmart of marketing in terms of your pricing, to have that be what you're selling to get new business, you never make enough revenue to actually hire people to manage all the accounts that you are constantly bringing in. And if you have a sales team who want to get a paycheck from new accounts and new accounts and new accounts, it's a churn and burn. And it just became the name of the game. Oh, well, we can probably string some of these clients along for like 90 days before they fire us because we're not doing a good job. So just do that and BS them every month, and then we'll just deal with the fires as we can. And my day quickly became less about doing the work and less about managing people and more about being customer complaint hotline and having to invent things to tell somebody every day. I tried to raise that to the boss many times, and it was ignored. I tried to set procedures and processes to get us back on track, but it seemed impossible. In my last day there, the day that I was let go, I still remember to this day the last thing that the president said to me. And he said, you might be a good writer, but you are not a manager and you are not an SEO guy. And I really let that haunt me for a while. My confidence was shaken badly for like a month after that. I kept being like, here's this person that I looked up to and saw as a mentor and who was rewarding me with all this stuff for, over a year of my life. And then he's telling me that I'm crap professionally at these 2 things that I felt like I was going to walk away with a real feather in my cap on my resume for doing this. Is he correct? As I sat with it for a while, I thought to myself at a certain point, well, you owe it to yourself to find out. And you know the only way you're going to know if he was correct is to climb back up on this horse and either get a job at another agency, or if you're pretty done with agencies for right now, then start your own thing. Do your own shingle, form an LLC, and try to leverage some clients and see what happens. And it was like right away, my very first SEO account on my own was a success quickly. The first couple of months of reports that I was showing that client were purely positive. I didn't have to BS them. I didn't feel like I was stringing people along and asking myself, how many months can I BS them before they get sick of it and fire me? And I had that client for well over a year in an industry where 3 to 6 months is common for them to leave. And I kept doing that with a few more accounts after that. Felt like I was on a winning streak. And so pretty demonstrably, I proved to myself I can do SEO when I am not overwhelmed, when I'm not put in a position of impossible odds. And it was funny in retrospect looking at it that I was like, when I started my own business and asked myself, how many hours do I think it takes to do a really good job for one of these clients? And therefore, without hiring a whole team behind me, how many clients can I personally do a good job for? And the answer was probably between 6 and 8, 6 and 9, something like that, depending on their size. And I looked back on it, I was like, okay, so now that I've established to myself that I can handle, like, on average, 7, 8 accounts, how many did I have at this agency? 25, 26? And I was also running 18 social media accounts, and I was also overseeing 2 other departments and taking client calls. Like, it's really no wonder in retrospect none of that worked out. But even after I kind of restored my confidence in SEO, I think for years after that, the you're not a manager thing really dug in there, because I found for a long time when I hit that ceiling of like, yeah, I'm maxed out, I can't take any more clients, but I'm not making as much money as I'd really like to make. And friends or colleagues would tell me, well, you need to outsource, hire some people. And I was so like, no, hiring isn't a route I want to go right now. And I spun it up fancily, like I have this specific, goal in mind and blah, blah, blah. But after long enough of hearing myself say that, it became clear to me, I think that's just a story I'm telling myself. And it's based out of fear. And it's because the last time I managed people, it ended in what felt like such a dumpster fire. And I was told by my mentor, you suck at this, you're no good. I think I've been afraid to manage anybody since then. Until it occurred to me, how many websites have been with you for years at this point, and they've allowed you to manage a big chunk of their marketing and their entire website and the content strategy and other members of their team. You are managing things, and you're doing it well, especially at this point. Again, in an industry where a 6-month turn is pretty common, and to have clients that have been with me for 6 to 8 years, almost 10 years in one case, I think is a pretty clear proof that my former boss was about as wrong as you can be. Now, that's not to absolve myself of any responsibility of that position ending, because sure, there were things I didn't know, and maybe I did, in my ambition, take on more than I was really capable of, at the time, and I did not do a good enough job advocating for myself. And really, in retrospect, I would say, at the point it was obvious to me, 6 months before I was actually let go, it was obvious to me, this job is not what I thought it was. The leadership here doesn't know what the heck is going on. I don't believe this company is going in a direction that there's really any future, to be frank. And I thought that to myself several times, and yet did not have the motivation or the drive to say, well, then I guess I need to dust off my resume and start aggressively trying to find myself a better situation. I stayed in my misery until I was fired. That was a mistake. But I recognize now, 10 years later, having run a fairly successful and pretty stable business in all of that time, I realize how long those words haunted me to some degree, and what a disservice that was to myself to ever just think of myself as a man, as that deriving value from how good of an SEO guy am I, how good of a writer am I, how good at marketing am I, how good at managing teams of people am I, and how does that now, define who I am as a person. That's ridiculous, first of all, because it's just a job. And second of all, to think that one person from one company that is so far in the rear view should have that sort of influence over my self-image is silliness. And I would urge anybody who's young and starting out in their career to be very cognizant of that when you start a job. Now, sure, be deferential to a point to your elders. Learn what you can from people who are more skilled than you. Don't go in with arrogance thinking you deserve things you don't deserve, that you haven't earned yet, or that you know better than everyone. But also be real with yourself about what you want from your career trajectory. And if you feel that things are being asked of you that are unrealistic or unfair, and you're being judged by things that are not realistic, I urge you to have the strength of self-reflection to realize that that is not worth going down the roads of maybe I suck and maybe I'm not good, because you will make it true if you buy into that stuff for too long. And I am fortunate that in the decade that followed that agency job, my career path has been fulfilling and has been full of wins. And I've been able to prove to myself, and I really think I needed to prove to myself, how wrong he was on all counts. And as I can look back now, even though I have to take some ownership of the failure of that job, I can also look back on it and say, here is a CEO who had a production line mentality that doesn't make any sense in an artistic field, who priced his services all wrong, who had a broken hiring practice that created a toxic work environment where he pitted employees against each other in an almost, not even that exaggerative to say, almost gladiatorial style, only one of you emerges the winner, let's see what happens. And it took him 6 months of accounts being on fire to really directly intervene. And even at that, he thought the answer was firing his marketing director, and then everything else in the company was instantly fine. You're already understaffed, and firing people is the solution. In retrospect, I could look at that and say, this is the leader that you're going to let tell you who you are as a professional. That makes no sense. And so I'm 40 at this point, so I've been in the game for a while. I'm still kind of at the midpoint of my career, but I would certainly say for anyone at this stage with me, or especially if you're in your 20s and you're starting out and really proving yourself, be very clear on what you kind of want. And if you've not given a lot of thought to that, you should. That would be my advice. Because a lot of the mistakes I made in that role and before it and for a while after it were very much because I was not clear on what I really wanted or expected, and I was being too passive. Even though I was a very hard worker in certain ways to prove myself, I was very passive at the same time about, like I said, advocating for myself and trying to actually create an environment that was conducive instead of just existing in it and hoping for the best. And that cost me a lot. Like I said, I'm fortunate enough that I've come out on the good side of this after long enough, but definitely looking back, that's something that I wouldn't do that way again, and I wouldn't be in that situation again with anybody. And now that I have been able to create the expectations the way I think is fair with my clients, I've had very little pushback most of the time, very little turnover with clientele. Things have really worked out well. And so it was a mistake to ever allow myself to be judged and defined to that degree by a person who wasn't really qualified to do so. And really, even if they were absolutely correct that I was a lousy manager and a lousy SEO guy, so what? That's not who I am as a human being. That's not how I should judge myself as a husband or a father or a friend or simply a man. And it would have been a huge mistake to allow it to. Even if those things were true, the only answer in that case is take some management training, study up more on SEO, take some courses, learn from people who are very good, practice more. Plug the holes in your skill set. The end. It doesn't need to go deeper than that. Those are the solutions. And so I guess before I ramble on, for too long, because I could talk about this kind of stuff all day, I hope that was helpful for you guys if you're in a similar boat. And even if you're not necessarily, if you're somebody who's been looking at SEO companies, In a way, that's advice I would give you as a potential customer of an SEO firm is ask some questions to whatever agency you're thinking of hiring to sort of try to unearth what is their team structure like, how much time do they spend on accounts, what's their pricing structure like compared to other firms, and don't think that because somebody is charging half or less of what a whole bunch of other firms are charging that you're getting a great deal, because in that example, you're not. You'd be better off paying somebody twice as much who actually has a good team behind them and will do good work for you than somebody charging Walmart prices and being understaffed and making excuses to you every month. That doesn't help you. That's throwing money out the window. So I'm going to leave it there for today. If you've made it this far in the video, I appreciate you bearing with me and hearing the story, and I hope that was kind of interesting and helpful to you, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. And if you have any thoughts on stories like that, I would love to hear them, and leave them in the comments below. Thanks, guys.